custom streaming. Preparing to live stream the meeting. Just give me a second, guys. I'm going to mute my audio for when it... You keep talking for a sec, Rick.
Okay.
We're live.
We're live?
Yep.
Okay. I will... Can you make me the host again, Hudson?
B, are you... Woody. Darren, do you see it?
Yep.
Yep, we're live.
Rick, I'm going to give the host back to you. Normally, all this sausage making takes place with Woody, so we are figuring it out as we go here, guys.
Okay.
All right. Live production.
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Well, welcome everybody. I'll be Woody this week. We've got a bunch of people here on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about filters. We've got a lot of questions, which is great. And so for the next office hours, which will be February 1st, we'll take camera questions. We will assume that most of the questions will be about Nikon, but we'll be able to take some Sony questions if people want to put those in as well. So that's February 1st. And I think that's about it.
I think that's about it. Yeah, we've had a lot of Nikon questions. I would say that for those of you who submitted Nikon questions for today, we're gonna sort of tuck those aside and toss them in for the next office hours on the 1st, just because we have so many filter questions.
Yeah.
And today we'll take off with me doing just a few little demos and talking about sort of the evolution of my filter use over the last 20 years. You know, it's changed a lot with the transition from film to digital, and then from the evolution of digital post-processing. So we'll just kind of go through a little bit different types of filters, and then, you know, different types of systems, as well as what types of filters you ought to think about carrying out there in the field, whatever system you do use. So that's what, so I just jump in and start.
Yeah, you might as well just jump right in.
Okay, cool. Well, you guys can all see I've got my my new Z9, which the autofocus on it is pretty darned amazing for my first few days of practice. And I got my 70 to 200 millimeter lens on here, and it has a 77 millimeter front thread. And I think that, you know, when we think about the traditional filter use, I've got this Hoya HD3 UV filter. You know, traditionally, just threading that lens's size filter on there, whatever kind of filter you wanted, was kind of the method that we all used back in the day, except for times when you wanted to differentiate between, let's say you had a high contrast scene, like a sunset scene with a shadowed foreground. You know, Galen Rowell came up with the graduated neutral density filter where you could hold the sky back and let the foreground expose. And in the days of film, I used to use those all the time. And I still see a lot of people using them now in the digital age, but I've kind of stopped using them. And I'll talk about why that is as I move ahead. But there's still plenty, you know, you can choose between whether you're going to use a square slotted system, a round threaded system, or what I really love now, and I find kind of the most simple, is the magnetic system. So, you know, a lot of people know it as, you know, a Nikon guy. I really love the fact that they've made most of their lenses compatible with this HB97 hood that comes with the 14 to 24 millimeter lens. And I just mount a case 112 millimeter magnetic filter ring in there. And I have this packet of all the filters that I use. I actually have 6 filters in here. And if I'm in rough conditions, I'll drop a UV filter in. It just magnets right in there. If I want a circular polarizer, I pull that one off and put a circular polarizer on it. You can just spin it in that magnetic ring. You don't need 2 rings, one that threads into the camera and the other one that spins on that ring. So it's really thin and you have less fear of vignetting, beside the fact that it's like 112 millimeters. If I wanted to add some neutral density, I can just magnet it right to that polarizer and spin both of them. It's just a really simple system. Now, a lot of people are using lenses that don't necessarily accept this big 112 millimeter hood. And you know, or you've got other lenses that don't accept that head. Well, they make, you know, they make magnetic adapters, and they make non-magnetic adapters for other brands. I really advocate getting big filters. You know, there was a time when I had, the biggest lens I had was 77 millimeters, and I had wide angle lenses that were 77 millimeters. And I had, you know, long lenses that were 77 millimeters as the front element. And then you find that in your wide angle lenses, you're vignetting when you use a 77 millimeter lens. Just sticking out a little bit further than the manufacturer designed the lens barrel can cause you to start getting, you know, that vignette like you're looking down a gun barrel in your images. I've found that just by expanding out to an 82 millimeter filter with a step-up ring, you know, and here again, I've got some case magnetic filters. Here's some case magnetic filters with a magnetic cap. Oops, I grabbed it the wrong direction. You just drop it on there. And now all of a sudden I'm using an 82 millimeter filter on my 77 millimeter lens. That's an ND filter right there. Another nice thing with these magnetic filters is you can carry a little stack cap set. I got a back and front cap, and I have a circular polarizer and 2 neutral density filters right here. You can keep it in your pocket. But you could also, you know, step it out and use an 82 millimeter threaded filter. I advocate, even if your biggest lens is 77 millimeters and you're not working with the 112 millimeter Nikon system, I'd say get 82 millimeters because, you know, it's going to avoid vignetting on your wide angle lenses, even if they're 77 millimeters, but eventually they're going to come out with a lens. Some aftermarket company or your camera brand is going to build a lens that's 82 millimeter thread. You know, it's a pretty common thread size. And you've invested in a whole bunch of 77 millimeter filters because at this moment, that's your biggest front lens thread, then all of a sudden you need to sell all those used for pennies on the dollar and buy 82 millimeter filters. You know, and you can buy these adapters really easily. You know, you can get magnetic ones if you buy into the case system for its simplicity and ease of use. You can get ones that are threaded. You know, occasionally you'll be out there in the field in a wonderful situation and you want to switch and then you accidentally cross-threaded a filter and you're out there trying to get just the right hold on it to get it uncross-threaded and swearing as the light changes. That's the thing I love about the magnetic system, is it just kind of eliminates a lot of that kind of problem. So that to me is sort of the simplest type of filter to use. I really like the round magnetic or round threaded, and I've been using them, I don't know, pretty much exclusively round for the last 7 or 8 years. I still sometimes do use the sort of rectangular 100 millimeter format. And we're going to talk about types of filters in a second and the difference between all the different brands out there in a minute. But I'm just more talking about how do you put a filter in front of your camera right now. And you know, this sort of system comes with different rings. This is the Case K9, which I like a lot. You can just sort of thread it onto the front of your lens. This has a 77 millimeter ring. You can put an 82 millimeter ring. Again, you can use all those same kind of adapters to get to 77 or 82 millimeters on a different lens if you want. And you just thread that guy out in front. And then the nice thing, Nisi does a really similar thing with their rectangular system. It's just a little bigger and heavier. Everything comes in this nice case. And in the front here, they've got a circular polarizer. It's a 95 millimeter one. And it just drops in there magnetically. And this little red knurled dial on the side spins it to polarize. I can see I need to clean that guy off. I'll talk about
Hudson.
cleaning. Yeah.
Could you take that off the camera and maybe hold it a little bit closer to the camera? Some people are saying they can't really see what you got there. So,
well, hold on. I actually have to take the whole thing off. As it comes with the ring. All right. So, I mean, it's essentially a filter holder. And then you can drop, there's a little place to get it out with your fingernail. You can drop this thin magnetic 95 millimeter circular polarizer into there. And then there's a little knurled red dial on the side that spins that polarizer in the filter holder. But the beauty of it all is, you know, once you thread it onto your lens, like so, that then, you can take your neutral density filters. And again, I'm gonna talk about why, but I'm gonna urge you to sort of eschew graduated neutral density filters in favor of batting your post-processing in a more nuanced way. They have these ultra thin, they're 1 millimeter thick glass filters for the case system. They just slide in there. And now I've got 10 stops of neutral density in front of my lens. Boom, that easy. They also, I asked them they made a neutral night filter that slots in there where that circular polarizer slots in. The neutral night filter can't be made in this ultra thin glass. So I had them make a 95 millimeter magnetic version that drops in the same way that the circular polarizer does, for those of you who are fans of the ultra thin slot. They also make a set of rails for this that work with either the ultra thin glass or traditional thicker, let's say you had Lee filters or some other brand of thicker glass filter so that you can mix and match. I think the action's a little nicer. If you buy the whole system using the ultra thin, it just slots in smoother and easier than it does in the dual capacity holder, but both work. And you can just, with a couple of screws, change those side panels. Nisi has a really similar system that also spins the circular polarizer behind the glass. I know DC was out working with a really nice system from Polar Pro. Case makes a new one called the Armor system that's really highly magnetic and slides up, and it's really clearly made for graduated filters. And again, I'm going to just say that I think the graduated filter is great for time lapse or video where you can't do exposure blending in post-production. And we'll talk about, why I think that's important. There's one third kind of way to get a filter into your system. And I'll talk about that really briefly using my Nikon Z7 here. And that's to just kind of open it up. They make these for different camera brands. You're looking at the sensor right there. They've got these little drop-in filters. This is a neutral night filter for the Nikon Z cameras. And you can just take that little filter, open your camera up, drop it into the mirror assembly box. There's a little rubber piece that sort of snaps it in there. And then they've got a suction cup that you can pull it out with, or you can reach in with your fingers and pull it out. It's not a bad way to go if you're working with a lens that doesn't have any way to mount a filter and you want to put some neutral density in, or if you're going out to do Milky Way work and you just want to do the neutral night filter, a light pollution filter. You can drop that into the mirror box and it's just there for your whole shoot, whatever lens you're working with. They're cheaper, but the problem with it is, if you're out in rough conditions, the last thing on earth you want to do is be opening up your mirror box and messing around with your fingers near the sensor. If you've got, rain happening or blowing dirt or a dusty location, you're just prone to be getting all kinds of stuff on your sensor. And it's just an awkward way of going about it. Actually, Rick has.
I was going to say, I've got.
Yeah.
So Sony and Sigma does as well. I don't know about other camera manufacturers and lens manufacturers, but Sony basically for some, I've got I don't know if you can see, they've got the 14 millimeter 1.8, which is one of my new favorite lenses for the Sony. And it's got that sort of tulip lens hood with the bulb. So it doesn't take normal filters. There's no filter thread on it. But on the rear end of the lens, there is basically you can put a filter in and it locks in. I have a set of Haida filters, and I will say it's sort of very similar to what Hudson's talking about, although you're not getting anywhere near the sensor, but it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. I mean, you go in, you sort of drop it in.
Yeah, it's a little.
And then there's a little latch on the top, and basically it holds it in there. So this fall, when I was shooting the Milky Way at night, before I went out, I knew I wanted my neutral night filter in, so I put it in there, put the rear cap back on, and when I went out to shoot, I was all set to go for that. And Haida makes it's a decent set. They do a 4 ND stops like 3, a 4, a 6, and a 10, and then the neutral night as well. There's a little, you basically pull out the old lens ring at the back end, put in this new clip, and it works pretty well. When I'm in the field, I have a set of, just sort of latex gloves with me, so that I put it out without getting fingerprints on it. It works. I would much prefer to have a front lens element, though.
Yeah.
But if you're invested in Sony and you've got the 14-1.8, the 12 to 24 2.8, those filters work with both of those lenses. And there's a Sigma one, and also the other Sony, the 12 to 24 f4. They've got a filter for it, so it works.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly great for the ultra wide angle lenses that have that sort of slot in the back. If you have that 14 millimeter that Rick has, it's worth having that system just for the neutral night filter. I mean,
yeah.
And you don't necessarily want to polarize with an ultra wide angle. We're going to talk about types of filters in a minute. So it isn't that big a deal that you can't turn a polarizer out in front of it when you're talking about more about neutral density, and a night filter is what you're going to be using with lenses. I forgot to mention that, if you are using the 112 millimeter system for that Nikon hood, the HB97, you also have the opportunity to just throw a very large magnetic adapter ring on to just throw those up there. And I have a 95 millimeter one for the 500 PF, and I have a 72 millimeter one and a 62 millimeter one, 82, 77. So, you can just they're a threaded back piece with a magnetic front piece that takes those 112 millimeter filters. I
think one of the things that is, whether you go with the magnetic system or you go with the screw-in system, you really do want to get the largest possible filter that you can get, and then just use step-up rings, whether they're magnetic step-up rings or not. I mean, I've carried a set of step-up rings for every one of my lenses on every trip I go. I've got a 49 millimeter thread on one lens, and it's great not to have to go buy, filters just for that lens, especially because I don't use them that much. But when I do, being able to go up to an 82 to use my 82 millimeter filters is just great.
Yeah. I adapt my little Z50 16 to 50, which has a 46 millimeter filter thread up to 82 when I shoot video with it outside all the time. It looks ridiculous. The filter's bigger than the camera, but it works great. And there's certainly no worry about vignetting with something like that. So, and you guys will see, if you run over to my website at hudsonhenry.com/case, I only carry the 112 and 82 because I don't think anybody should buy anything smaller than 82. There's an argument for 95 for some people that maybe their biggest thing's 95, but I keep it simple. I'd sort of sell what I would advocate using.
So how about the magnetics? Can you talk about the magnetics? You've been using them for a while now. I mean, I do see out there people get a little bit worried about, this is just a magnet.
And fair enough. There is that concern that somehow this thing's going to fall off the front of your lens. We had in Yellowstone in particular a couple people who were saying, that this thing's coming off my lens, and I think that those people were walking around with the camera kind of bouncing on the side of their bag or on their hip. I'd be really careful about that. I think a glancing blow. Let me throw one on here. I'm going to put an 82 millimeter adapter here on this 77 millimeter front lens, and then we'll toss. Oops! Once again, I grabbed the back side. We'll toss a filter and a cap. They were pretty smart. They've made the caps less magnetic than the filter, so it's really easy to pull the cap off. But I can't get the cap or the filter to fall off if I do that. So, I've practiced that enough. I have zero concern about it. But if I bump it, they'll come off. So that's the problem. You got to make sure your camera's not bouncing around, bumping on your bag. You got to keep it pretty firmly on your side or hold it. And I don't worry. These filters are really resistant to scratching or banging up. That's why I didn't worry too much about knowing I was about to knock that thing off. That's where it happens though. If you've got this thing dangling and bouncing around and bouncing off your bag, you're going to get there and realize, where'd my filters go? Or you're going to hear them hitting the ground. Now they are really scratch and abrasion resistant, so they're probably going to survive hitting the ground. But I have no problem carrying them, making sure that it's snug. I'm not going to go just trundling around the landscape with them bouncing on the front. Maybe the cap only or a UV only. Take the filter, which is the expensive part, and stick it back in your bag. If you're really traveling to the next location, having it up over your shoulder on a tripod, having it tucked in your arm walking around, not a big deal at all. You just got to be careful that it's not getting hit from the side to disengage that magnet. It's not going to fall off just from shaking. So, I don't think you can have the advantages of the magnetic without, the fear that a glancing blow is going to knock the thing off. I don't think they can make it. It would be a pain in the butt if it were magnetic enough that wasn't going to happen. It's just the right amount of magnet for me. The other thing is you got to make sure it's seated right. If it's partly on there, it's more prone to falling off. If it's on there good, it's rock solid. So I love them. I find it so easy to switch from a polarizer to neutral density, to stacking a polarizer and neutral density. Plus they're so darn thin that I worry less about vignetting with the 82s on, an 82 millimeter threaded wide angle. I just don't have the issue the way I would if there was a long band of metal that's threaded on one end and then another band of metal for the polarizer to spin. You just wind up sticking out way more out of the front of your lens. So let's talk for a second about why I talk about one more thing quick about the systems, the Nikon hood. I saw a question, and I've seen this one other time on YouTube about some kind of light leak. I think somebody reported that they had a light leak using neutral density with the HB97 hood. With my case system, at least, I have never had that, and I've shot a ton with it. So it's not been an issue for me. I have the Nisi hood that they make that's exactly the same, but all metal. And it weighs about 3 times as much. And I just don't carry it because of that. It doesn't have this nice built-in cap that locks in place either. I like the Nikon one. It's just lightweight and it's got this nice cap. So, that's my take on it, is that light leak issue that people talk about has never reared its head for me. Maybe it's some other filter, I don't know, but not with the case system, which kind of that magnetic screw in ring sits back in there. Maybe that alleviates. I don't know. I haven't had any problem. All right. So my feeling about using graduated filters in this digital processing age really comes from Art Wolf. Back when I was coming up as a photographer, Art Wolf was one of the people I looked up to, and I did some training with him up in Seattle, gosh, long time ago, 15 years ago, maybe 18 years ago. And I just remember he was talking about his kit and what he carries, and he had round threaded filters, and I was carrying around Stingray graduated neutral density filters, the Galen Rowell kit at the time, shooting a combination of film and digital. And I said, what, are you not carrying graduated filters? He's like, in digital? No. He says, I just take differential exposures and blend them in layers in Photoshop, that you can bring your shadows back with an overexposed image and hold the highlights back with the image that's on the light meter or slightly underexposed, and get all that beautiful detail and not have a straight line that's dictated by a filter instead of your image. I've had so many images from the old days that I photographed with graduated filters where I look at them now in post-production, and there's these trees that come down to the lake, and the base of the trees and the lower half of the tree are beautiful green textured. And the top half of the tree where I dropped the graduated filter to hold back the sky are dark black with no shadow detail, because that filter is a straight line all the way across the image. Or there's a mountain range that's jagged on the sky. And where do you put that straight line that you're not making part of the mountains underexposed and part of the mountains exposed with the foreground? There's soft transitions and whatever, but still it just winds up being kind of a hinky way. It was great in the days of film when we weren't doing this kind of post-production stuff, but now you can capture an image. You know, I always advocate with these high dynamic range sensors that we're working with now, one on the light meter. The light meter tends to protect it tends to be kind of have enough to pull the shadow detail back, and then 3 stops underexposed, which makes sure that you protect the brightest of the bright highlight details. You know, and then check, looking at your histogram, that you're not running off the histogram to the left or the right if you're looking at both of those histograms as a kind of a cohesive whole. And then it's really easy in Lightroom and On1 and Capture One and Luminar, whatever you're working with, to blend those 2 images into a linear new raw file with all that exposure data to let you have more shadow detail and more highlight detail without over or underexposing in a nuanced way that doesn't have any kind of straight line running through it. So that's my personal preference. There's even some new techniques out there. An article that I was reading by Spencer Cox on AHDR. What does that stand for again? It's interesting. It's a way of doing sort of the same thing, star stacking, to get shadow detail with less noise, just underexposing a whole series of images and then compositing them the same way you would in a night sky image to reduce noise. But at any rate, there's wonderful ways in post
Averaged HDR. Our good friend Al popped in and said average. Yeah.
Averaged HDR, that's right. I just was remembering AHDR, which has its own nuances. I'm kind of working through that right now, and I might be putting out some materials about that. It can give you a better image, but it kind of highlights some of the flaws in sensors that are out there right now. Whole nother discussion. But in general, I'm just going to say that I think that unless you're doing time lapse or video work where you can't take 2 exposures or 3 exposures and blend them in post-production to get all that tonal range that you want, I wouldn't be using graduated neutral density filters, and I haven't been for 7 or 8 years in still photography.
Is there any reason to use remember the old days we used to use colored filters, red, yellow, for monochrome stuff? I can't think of any reason these days to use them.
And the reason for that is if you want to do black and white work and then convert it to I mean, the best way to do black and white work is to shoot in full color and convert it to black and white, and then have the ability under the engine, under the hood, so to speak, to work with the colors that are in that image in a way that you would in black and white. You can still apply those filters digitally now.
Yeah. I mean, all of the apps, Photoshop, Lightroom, On1, Capture One, all basically have a way to add those filters. I mean, you can add the exact filter that you can even use an infrared filter to do that. So.
And the other thing interesting about today's digital versus the past with film, you don't necessarily need a UV filter. UV filter, I still use them as a protective filter in rough situations. I always carry a magnetic one. If I'm out shooting kiteboarding with a really nice lens, I want to put a UV filter out in front, because if it gets sand scoured and pitted, I'd rather it be a cheap UV filter than the front element of my lens. If I'm hiking with a camera and using it constantly and I've got sunscreen and sweat and I'm just rough on the trail, I want a UV filter or a sky filter. They're kind of interchangeable. It's not going to really affect your image quality if you get a really good one. And it just is, it's like a protective layer of glass in front of your lens to just not damage your front element. If you're working in waterfall situation in the rain, you either want a polarizer or a UV filter or a sky filter, just because you're constantly going to be kind of wiping the moisture off, and better to be wiping the moisture off of a UV filter than that front element of your lens with all those expensive coatings on it. So, just those kind of protective filters. So I carry around at least one protective filter that can work on all my lenses. And I carry around a polarizer. Why am I carrying a polarizer? We talked about not necessarily needing colored filters anymore, because we capture kind of all the spectrum that the sensor can bring in, and we can do whatever we want in post-production with white balance or doing black and white type filtration in post-production. But a polarizer does some special stuff. Let me share my screen here for a second. Here's my case page. I have this little presentation that I workshops about gear and using. Oops, hang on a sec. You guys there?
Yep.
Are you there? It's doing it again, Rick. You guys there?
Says you've started. Says you've started screen sharing.
I might drop out. Might drop out.
Maybe stop. There you go. Oh, he's gone. And there's Bruce. Hey, Bruce.
Wait, am I back? Do you hear me?
Yes, you are
Am I
back. You are
Let me
back.
try sharing again. Am I in here? You
You
see my
just said,
screen?
yep, there we go. Yes.
All right, that happened. That came back really fast. Some kind of Zoom glitch I've got going. But anyhow, so this is part of a presentation that a lot of you who've done workshops with me have probably seen on kind of getting it right in your camera. And I talk about filters in the end of this presentation. And I talk about, neutral density is something I carry to be able to play around with time. This is a scene in Greece where waves were rolling through the shoreline and it was kind of a mess of frothy waves. And I wanted sunset and I wanted it serene and to show the color in the water and this interesting rock reef. And so I just slowed it down to 30 seconds by putting a 10-stop neutral density filter in front of my camera. And neutral density is something I use whether I'm trying to get exactly the right shutter speed for the frame rate I'm doing in video. I use it all the time for that because I shoot a lot of video of myself in the landscape. Or just to control get me longer shutter speeds for creative purposes, blurred clouds, blurred water. The neutral density is the way to do that. I use polarizers just to increase contrast and color in certain scenes. If you're pointed with the sun to your left or the sun to your right, you're aiming north or south, and the sun is not at high noon in the sky, it doesn't work. Polarizers don't work particularly well for this purpose when you're shooting straight into the sun or with the sun straight behind you, shooting north or south. But, if you're, shooting east or west, but if you're shooting north or south, this is looking north to Mount Adams at Trout Lake with no filter, pretty much unprocessed, beautiful night. And then putting the polarizer on and turning it, it just cuts all the reflectivity in the air and you get this, much more color, much more contrast. It drops your exposure a little bit. You have to compensate for it. If you're working with water, this water is reflecting the sky right now. This is my family in Cuba, right before, the year before COVID. The kids are tiny. My aunt, my wife, and I were out there. And, this is no filter at all. It's, middle of the day. This is about reflectivity. Polarizers cut reflectivity. As you turn them, you'll just see the reflections suddenly disappear. And now we see the color in the water and the sky has gotten darker blue. This is just something that it's really difficult to do that in post-production. It just won't happen. It's a filter that you can't emulate. I used it a lot in the days when I was doing more commercial work too. If you have glass in your scene, I shot a lot of wine bottles for a French wine distributor. I shot vehicles for an outdoor truck accessory company. And you get out in this beautiful scene and you look and there's just reflections of the sky and trees all over the vehicle windows. Slap a polarizer in front of your lens, start turning it, and you just see the reflections disappear off the front windshield. Snap your photo. Turn it, it disappears out of the side window. Snap your photo. Turn it, it disappears out of the king cab side truck window. It's differentially reducing reflections in different parts of your image. You have to turn it to get the look you want while you're looking, through your viewfinder. And then you can blend those in layers. I would get these images with no reflections. You get this nice image. You can do it with, glass in a house. So it has these neat attributes of polarizer. It's just something I always have with me. If you're in a rainy forest, let's say we were in the Hoh rainforest on our Olympic National Park workshop on a day where it had been a little bit rainy, turn that polarizer and all the reflectivity on that green vegetation gets cut through that wet vegetation. All of a sudden it just turns greener and more lush looking through your lens. You can bring a rainbow out, make it more prominent in the sky, a mountain lake, You know, you can suddenly see through the surface and see those beautiful rocks at the bottom, or you can enhance the reflection of the mountains that's playing out over the surface of the water. So it controls reflectivity, tone, and contrast. It's something that it cannot.
So when you say this, and we got a few sort of questions, comments about polarizers from many people who say, I just leave a polarizer on my lens. Why would you not do that? And there are situations, especially with wide angle lenses, where polarizers do more harm than good.
Absolutely. You know, I think anytime you're working with the lens 28 millimeters or greater, you got to be careful, or smaller, I would say, you know, a wider angle than 35 or 28 millimeters. You start getting into situations where when you have the sky in the frame, as you turn the polarizer, it can blue up the part of the sky that's north of you or south of you, depending on which direction you're facing, and not do it to what's east or west of you, in line with the sun, like I was just talking about. So you get this sky that's like whitish blue on the left and royal dark midnight blue on the right. It's like a gradient from light blue to dark blue in your frame, and there's almost nothing you can do to fix that.
Yeah, there's also, or sometimes you'll get the Eye of Sauron in the center of the frame.
That's an ultra wide.
Yes.
Ultra wide, where it's seeing east, west, and north.
Yeah,
You'll get this dark blue eye that fades to light blue in the sides. You got to be really careful. Ultra wide angle lenses and polarizers are a dangerous combination on a partly sunny day or a blue sky day. You know, you can use them to incredible use, you know, photographing that lake I talked about on a misty morning, and the surface of the water, there's just enough light in the high overcast that you're getting this white kind of glare off the surface of the water, but there's these beautiful agate-like rounded stone pebbles in the surface, on the foreground. So, you know, get your wide angle shot lined up and then turn the polarizer till all of a sudden you've cut that glare on the surface near you, and you see those rocks under the surface beautifully. And you don't have the blue sky to worry about in that scene. You know, it doesn't mean you never use it with an ultra wide angle lens. It just means you need to be careful with it. The other thing about a polarizer is that it acts as a light neutral density filter. When you put the polarizer on, it robs you of 1.5 to 2 stops of light. And so think about how much we spend extra on a lens that gives us 1.5 to 2 stops of light. How much difference does it cost between an f2.8 and an f4 lens? And if you run around all the time with a 1.5 stop neutral density filter on your lens, it's kind of like boosting your ISO in the same way you'd have to if you had an f4 lens instead of the 2.8 you're carrying, or, you know, an f6 lens instead of the f4 lens that you're carrying. So, you know, you got to think about that situation a little bit. The other filter, so I carry neutral density, UV for protective purposes, a circular polarizer, and a neutral night filter. I just find that my night work, it invariably looks better with the latest neutral night filters out there, from all the different brands that I've used. It just, you know, from Hoya's color intensifier to the neutral night filter from Case to the Nisi's natural night filter, they're all really nice.
yeah.
And that comes to another point. You know, I think that all of the best filter brands right now, and in that group, I'm going to say, you know, Hoya, Case, Nisi came suddenly and is really good. The latest stuff from Lee, I think the older Lee neutral density filters had quite a color cast. It's correctable, but it had quite a color cast. Breakthrough is another brand that makes really good quality filters. I have gone through and tested most of these filters. Actually, believe it or not, Koken has a brand, really expensive filters, square filters called Nuances, that are wonderful filters too. Hoya and Case, I don't know, some of the others too, I think, do infrared filtering in their neutral density filters, which is nice because that can actually create pattern noise in the shadows, as sensitive as our newest sensors are. And Nisi does too. Nisi, Hoya, and Case, I know. but I mean, in testing them all and zooming into 100% and looking at details and testing color patches shooting through neutral density, I just see them all being really, really good, to the point where I don't think you're going to notice a huge difference between these brands' filters. So, you know, if you buy the ultra cheap filters from any brand, you know, Hoya makes a whole different range of filters. When I talk about Hoya, I'm talking about their HD3 filters and their soulless infrared neutral density filters, not cheap filters, not the consumer grade ones that you're going to see, you know, at the Shutterbug store. And the same thing goes with Koken. You know, they make these really expensive 100mm filters that are great, but they're kind of general stuff you're going to find on Amazon, not so great. But I think the top of the line filters from all the companies have gotten so good, just like the lenses from all of our best companies have gotten so good in recent years. They're going to have a hard time finding a performance difference between the latest stuff from Lee, Case, Nisi, Hoya, the top stuff from or Breakthrough. They all make really nice stuff. So trying to think of any other questions, stuff that was hit on in questions. Maybe we should just jump into questions.
Yeah, I'm looking through the questions right now. You know, there's a bunch of questions about other brands, you know, Format, High Tech, and B&W, and those guys. And I think you just sort of hit it. You know, if you buy the cheap stuff, it's cheap. It really is.
Yeah. And I have not been impressed with anything from Format High Tech. I hate to say it. I mean, I've tried a few of their things and I've not been impressed. I don't know. Maybe they have some new stuff that I haven't tried. I can't speak to that. But, you know, a couple of years ago, I didn't like it. So. It's going to be a little tricky because I think I had the questions that I read in advance in mind as I was talking. So.
Yeah, I'm looking through. There's quite a few that we've sort of covered everything. Darren, is there anything on YouTube that we haven't really touched so far?
Nothing we haven't really touched on already, filter-wise.
Okay. Well, so Hudson, let's talk about just sort of when you go out into the field. You carry the 3, 6, and 10 stop neutral density, circular polarizer, protective. Yeah.
This case, this is my 112 case. This is my favorite kit to carry. It has my UV filter, my circular polarizer, a 3, a 6, a 10 stop neutral density filter, and my neutral night filter. And that's what I carry. That covers everything I might need. I just saw that Tony mentioned that you know, how do you clean them? And that's a really, really good question. And I think that I would just advocate, if you run over to, you know, my links page, most of you know my links page, hudsonhenry.com/ATS links, under, I think it's either under essentials or I have a cleaning section, residual oil remover. I mean, I think that the first thing that you want to do, if possible, with a filter is blow it off with your rocket blower. No matter what you're going to do, blow it off and then look at it close. You know, if you're like me and you have reading glasses, check it that there's not some grain of sand stuck on there that you're about to grind in. If there's just some little dust or something, hit it with a really clean, good microfiber cleaning cloth. See if you can get it off that way and blow it again. But if you really have a bad fingerprint or sunscreen or some kind of gunk on there, a drop of this residual oil remover and then a clean microfiber cloth to just buff it off is going to take care of it. You know, that's also what I use on the front element of my lens. It's just like the front element of your lens. Take the same level of care. I did see a couple people talking about, I never photograph without a protective filter in the front of my lens. And I have gone through this evolution. I've gone 720 degrees on this. In reality, I have. For years and years, I was of the opinion that I noticed a difference using UV filters. Now, I wasn't using the finest UV filters on the planet at the time. And I never really used them. I just felt like, why put a cheap piece of glass in front of my $2,000 lens? And then when I started the relationship I had with Hoya before Case, the distributor for North America said, you got to try these HD3 UV filters. And I went on a trip to Europe and they gave me a set of them for all the lenses that I was taking. And I focused on shooting sun stars. I was really getting into perfecting shooting sun stars. And I shot them all with and without, direct into backlight. Made sure they were clean before I was doing that, made sure my lenses were clean. And I just couldn't see any reduced quality through those expensive HD3 UV filters. And so for years, I ran around with these HD3 filters in front of all of my lenses. I had one for each lens. Now, granted, I was an ambassador for them and I didn't have to spend a couple $100 a lens on them. But the neat thing I did enjoy about that was, they would get dirty and I'd clean them. They were really, really durable, kind of like iPhone glass. I wouldn't worry about cleaning them with my t-shirt. But if I got into a situation where I was about to shoot into backlight and stop down to create a sun star, I would pull it off and my lens was perfectly clean underneath and I wouldn't get those kinds of enhanced sensor dust things that you get stopping down for a sun star that ruin the effect. So, I still think there's an argument for carrying them just to keep your optics perfect underneath. And then when you're in that masterpiece situation, you can pull the UV filter in case it's dirty and have a perfectly clean piece of glass underneath. But, these days when I'm shooting, the only time I really mount the UV, because I'm using the magnetic system, most of the time I don't have them on my optics. If I'm going to carry it as the camera that I have on my side while I'm running around hiking or I'm playing with my kids and it's bouncing around on my side, yes, I'm going to mount a UV filter, whether magnetic or screw on. And I have those with me, but it makes it easier. I would never stack a filter on top of a UV filter because it's doing nothing for you and it's adding another level of reflective glass not designed by the manufacturer. I want to stack as few filters as I can to get the effect that I'm after. And the minute I put another filter on there, I'm not worried about the front of my lens getting damaged. A circular polarizer will replace this. So when I did use them, I always pulled them off before I ever put another filter on.
And the other thing that I would add there is, when you're working in harsh conditions, like, we were in Brookings and it's windy and, the other thing you want to have is your blower handy because, you get sand in these threads, with a UV filter and it's a pain in the ass. Either you put it back on and it gets locked on because of the sand or the other way. If you're using screw-on filters, you want to have a filter wrench to sort of help get them disconnected from your lens. But
when it boils down for me I was kind of courted by a bunch of brands that were making 112 millimeter filters because Hoya wasn't. And I was really enamored with the fact that this hood fits not only the 14 to 24 that they sell it with, that it comes with, you can buy them separately. It fits the 24 to 70 2.8. It fits the 70 to 200 2.8 Nikon. It fits their really fancy 51.2. It fits the 14 to 30 lens. It fits a whole bunch of their lenses. Just snap, click, and you got this.
Not the new 100 to 400.
Not the new 100 to 400, which upsets me. Which makes me wonder if it was just random and they weren't intending to do something awesome, and it just is by happenstance that it fits all those lenses. But it does, and it makes it really easy to just use this one hood, snap it in front of my lens, and go shooting with filters. And so I started testing everything. Nisi sent me filters to test, and I was testing all these different brands, and I'm like, they're all really good. I thought I would do a video about it, but I couldn't find enough difference. I think that the end result was like, wow, they're all within this small margin of error, really good. And the magnetic case ones were just so easy to use. I can't remember how many times I've been in the field frustrated because two filters are stuck together that I want to use, or I've got one stuck on my lens that I don't want on my lens and I need to spend some time, or I've got sand on the threads, or, you're using all these different, in the fact that you can just spin a magnetic adapter ring, click, pull, stack, click, pull off, click. I mean, it just made it a no-brainer for me. When deciding, I thought the ease of use. There was a while, I know a lot of you probably remember, where I used Manfrotto's now abandoned Zoom magnetic filter holders, but that system kind of pushed your threaded filters even further out by mounting a magnetic ring behind a threaded filter and then mounting a lens adapter. That made it was nice, but it was leading to even more increased vignetting with wide angle lenses. So, and then Manfrotto quit making those anyway, so that became unviable anyway. And I think I just love that, the fact that there are 6 112 millimeter filters in this little case sort of says the whole thing. Small, light, thin, easy to use. So that's what swung me. Ease of use. There was a question I had just thought of.
So Ken, our good friend Ken, says that he has used the 112 hood with the 100 to 400. So
doesn't fit on my 100 to 400, sadly. There's a large gap, like several millimeters too wide, trying to fit it on
the stacking. Did you talk about stacking? I don't think you really talked about stacking filters too much.
I mean, the biggest concern I feel like when using filters is keeping them clean, which I'm glad I thought of at the last second here, and making sure there's no light leaks in between them. And I think you want to stack as few filters as you can to get the effect that you're after. But I will say that with this very lens and with this hood, I stacked all 3 of my neutral density filters with Rick when we were out. Remember when we were shooting Mount Hood in the distance on that really bright day and I wanted to blur the clouds? And it was just middle of the day, high sun. We were in Eastern Oregon looking west toward Mount Hood across these windmills. And I shot this blurred scene of the clouds blowing by for 2 minutes of Mount Hood with the 10, the 3, and the 6. And it came out beautiful. I mean, there was some heat haze that robbed me of sharpness in the distance because it was, at 200 millimeters, but color neutral, no weird artifacts, it was really not, I was like, wow. And, I think the other thing you have to worry about with stacking filters, if you're not using these ultra thin magnetics and really wide filters, is vignetting. The more you stack out there, the more chance you have of vignetting. So it's all about the quality of the filters, keeping them clean, and making sure that you have a wide enough, thin enough filter not to be vignetting on your lens. But I don't see a problem with stacking. And particularly, there are times where you want to kill the reflection on the water to see through the surface and slow the clouds down. So some neutral density and a circular polarizer can work really well.
We're actually pretty much went through all of the big questions that we had, to be honest.
Cool.
Let's see.
I will.
Oh, go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, one person asked, if it was kind of a side, said how you deal with mist from waterfalls. I'm shooting waterfall, taking long exposure using neutral density. But he keeps getting water on the front element there.
Well, I'll tell you how I deal with it. I have a couple. I remember the question, so I stand by. I would put this guy over this. That's my 77 to 112 adapter. Then I would grab my UV protective filter, as I said, drop it on there, click. And then when I'm shooting the waterfall, I would
Walk away.
compose it. I went away, I would go away, but I would compose it. And then I'm going to drape a cloth over the front while I adjust settings and think about, you know, what I'm doing and kind of peek at the scene, and then keep that cloth over the front, a bigger cloth than this even, you know, having a nice large microfiber cloth, maybe one of those little packable towels from REI that fold up really small, but they're really absorbent. Keep it out over the front of your lens, you know, and then in between shots, you've got a UV filter on there. I'm just going to wipe it off, shoot, you know, and you can even kind of try to hold, you can wipe it off, hold it up, shoot. It's going to be a little hit or miss. You know, if you've got a long, sometimes if you've got a long hood and you have the standard UV filter that fits under your hood, the hood can help a little bit, but still drape that cloth out over the hood. And that brings me to another question. That's the one that I was thinking about that we hadn't hit on. And that's, how do you use a hood with your filters if you're adapting them up? And the answer is you really don't. Case hit me up with a filter system or a hood system that, you know, you can magnetically connect to the front filter and it creates a hood that goes out. And I'm not a huge fan of it. I'd like them to rework it a little bit, but it is an interesting solution, like a magnetic old-fashioned rubber hood that just connects into whatever size filters you have. I mean, it's a thought, but I think that in general, using filters with the hood has always been kind of tricky, particularly like a polarizing filter. Sony is the only brand I know of that builds a little door into their hood that you can flick open and reach in and turn your polarizer inside the hood. And I think it's brilliant. And I don't know why Nikon and everybody else doesn't do the same thing. It's just a little slide open and close.
Canon does. I've had it on some of my old Canon lenses, the big glass. Yeah.
Well, then it's a complaint of mine to Nikon that they don't do it on their best lens hoods. But at the same time, I just gave you the major use case that I have for hoods. Hood is like a UV filter to me, kind of a protective thing for the front element of my lens. It's so rare that I'm shooting into backlight where the light's just barely off to the side and out of the frame, but causing a flare issue with me with modern glass. You know, typically I'm shooting right into the sun. Well, the hood isn't going to do any good for you whatsoever if you're shooting right into the sun in a backlit sunset situation. It's really more for studio situations like I'm sitting in right now. I have a light off to my left, and that hood could block that light from flaring in my studio situation. Or someone's shooting music scenes indoors and they're probably not using filters in those situations. I think in the natural landscape, people put the hood on because it comes with their lens and it looks cool. But in most situations, I don't usually bring the hoods for my lenses aside from this filter hood with me out into the landscape in my backpack. It's great in the rain. It can keep raindrops off the front element of your lens. It's good in a situation like a kid's birthday party where people are bustling and banging around you and you don't want anyone to hit the front element of your lens. It's just a little bit of protection for the front element of your lens. You can accomplish the same thing as a lens hood with your hand if you're careful about it in scenes where you might want it. So that's, you know, I know that was another thing Art Wolf told me, was that the first thing he does with a lens hood when he opens the box for his new camera is throw it in the trash, because he'd rather just use his hand. He may have a different tune than that today, but that was his opinion of them 15, 16 years ago.
Well, I'll give you an opportunity to share your opinion on something else that I don't think we touched upon, which is variable neutral density filters.
Yeah, not a fan. I am not a fan of variable neutral density filters. I think they're great from about 2 stops to 4 to 6 stops. And when you go beyond, you start having all kinds of weird color cast, X patterns. They're a stacked pair of polarizers, and things get weird when you try to put too much density in. I think you're way better off with a single 3-stop neutral density filter and maybe a 6-stop. If you want to do really creative stuff, add a 10-stop. I will give you an honest truth. There was a well-known filter brand hit me up about a neutral a variable neutral density filter that they had just come out with. And I said to the guy, is it better above 6 stops than anything else I've used? And he said, no. I said, then I don't want to do anything with it. I remember I got one from Stingray, almost 20 years ago. And I saved for it. It was like, I spent like $450 on it or something. And it was just terrible. I was like, oh. And then I got one from oh my gosh, the Tokina. No, yeah, Tokina. They make it for broadcasts, indoor, like broadcast TV cameras, and it's supposed to be the best variable neutral density filter ever. Hoya let me have one. They were like $800, and it didn't work very well above 6 stops out in natural light. They have inherent problems at high neutral density. So
yeah, I have 2 Stingray neutral density filters sitting in a drawer, just
free.
yeah. Anybody wants them, just send me a message. I'd love to get rid of them.
I gave mine to someone. So
yeah. All right. Well, we have wasted a perfectly good hour of everyone's time talking about filters. That's kind of crazy to me that we could actually talk about filters for an hour. We appreciate everyone taking the time and asking all the questions. Like we said, on the 1st of February, we'll have a sort of camera Q&A. We'll assume that it'll mostly be Nikon, but I'm happy to take Sony questions. I'll make sure DC is in the audience, so I can turn to him if I have something I can't answer.
Well, I shot a solid month with the R5 and really enjoyed that Canon camera, so I can answer some questions about where they are. I haven't shot with the R3 yet, but I've spent time with Canon, and I have owned Fujis too. So whatever you want to talk about, but let's we'll hit a lot of those Nikon questions. I imagine it'll be pretty Nikon focused.
Yes, there will be tons of Nikon questions. We've actually been saving some of the questions that we've gotten over the last couple of office hours where we haven't had time. So, all right, everybody. Well, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much, everybody. All right. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Darren.
Yep. And David too.
And David too. I don't know where I'm in the right. All right. See you guys.
Bye, everybody.